O-Team, we have a big surprise for you at the top of the show in just a second. Plus, breaking news, Minneapolis in flames, a police department abandoned to the mob. Also, Trump signs an executive order on social media. And what does the World Health Organization say about masks? Coming up. Welcome, everybody, to the Buck Sexton Show. Thank you very much for joining. It is an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to bring to you an exclusive interview between yours truly and, of course, the President of the United States, Donald John Trump. My friends, the closer we get to freedom here in New York and in the tri-state area, some ways it feels like the further we get from it with these crazy new rules that keep getting added on to things. We've got some specificity from the mayor here, de Blasio, about what expectations are for businesses, assuming the reopen is on schedule for early June, and then it'll be in phases every 2 weeks. We'll talk about that. But, you know, I've got a whole bunch of show to tell you about. But first, I think we'll get right to it. Special treat for all of you listening. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, joins us now live. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Buck. It's an honor.
So let's just get right to it. We saw the numbers today, and we knew the numbers on the unemployment were going to be bad, sir. And people are really concerned. I'm here in New York. You're a fellow New Yorker. But all across the country, people are worried about jobs. What do you want to say to the folks who are just beginning to see that the country is reopening?
Well, it really is. It's starting, and it's going to start, and I think it's going to get really, you know, I've been calling it. You actually wrote it once, and I do watch you, and I think you're terrific, Buck, I have to say. Hence, I talk to you. But I think that you're going to see a transition to greatness, and the transition is going to begin pretty much now. It's already started if you look at the stock exchanges. When you're at 25,000 plus, and we just went through the worst pandemic since 1917, over 100 years, it's pretty amazing. But I think you're going to see some very good numbers coming into the third quarter, and I think the fourth quarter is going to be terrific, and I think next year is going to be a great year. We have a lot of stimulus out there. We have a lot of potential to do things, and I just think you're going to see some really good numbers, and I think you're starting to see that right now.
And with the governors that are saying that they're going to need additional funding, they're calling for bailouts. I know that you had a meeting with Governor Cuomo recently. How should that be handled? What's your position on what should go on here with the states that do have big budget shortfalls because of the lockdown?
Well, there's a big difference. If you're talking about the lockdown or the pandemic, that's one thing. And if you're talking about 25 years of bad management, which is really something that some of them are doing. You know, you look at some, and we won't use the names of the states, but if you look at some of what's going on, they want to have a bailout. And a lot of Republicans aren't wanting to do a bailout. Now, if it's to help over this terrible pandemic released and came right out of China that should have been stopped by China, they could have stopped it, they should have stopped it, that's a different thing. But so we're negotiating, and we'll see. We're going to take care of this country. But you do have a group of people, they want to solve and take care of problems that were not caused by the pandemic, and that's a different story.
For anyone joining us in progress, we're talking to the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Mr. President, I also wanted to ask about the possibility here of a second wave, something you and I spoke about briefly. And there's a lot of concern out there for businesses, for the markets, for people who want to, you know, if they get their job back or they get a new job, they don't want to have to shut it down again or lose another job. So what is your position on what we're facing right now? How are we preparing for the winter, the fall winter flu season from your perspective?
Well, the numbers are going down, and we've done everything right. We did the ban on China. We then did a ban on Europe. Last night, as you know, we did a ban on Brazil. Brazil's being hit very, very hard. But we will not be closing the country. We've done the right thing. We've gotten to know what we're dealing with, and it's very brutal. It's a nasty, horrible disease, and it's a shame we have to be doing this. It's a horrible thing that we've lost so many people, but the world has lost so many people. You know, we're 188, 186, 88 countries right now. all fighting it and fighting it, strong, but it's a terrible thing. But we will, I think what we might see is embers. You might see flames. You might see something, and we'll get it out. One way or the other, we'll get it out. We'll stop it. But the country's going forward. We're going forward, and that's the way it is. We have really, I consider it even no choice. We have to do it because you break a country. You break it by doing too much of what we did. We did the right thing. I'll give you an example. If we didn't do it, I think you would have lost 1.5 million to 2.5 million people. So that would be 15 times the number that we lost. It would not have been sustainable, acceptable. As a leader, it would not have been acceptable. People would have said, what is wrong with him? So we're at 100,000. That was the lower end, and one life is too many. I have to say, Buck, one life is too many. This should never have happened. But that's at the lower end of the lower models, and it's a terrible thing. But we could have lost 1.5 to 2.5 million people. So take all of the death you've seen and now multiply it times 10, 15, or 20 or more, and it would not have been sustainable. You would not have been. I think you would have had riots in the street.
Mr. President, we've in recent weeks had more information about the targeting of General Flynn, about the lies and the conspiracy around the Russiagate or OBAMAGate and these different versions of essentially the Russia conspiracy. Right. I wanted to know what we should be expecting going forward. Are there more revelations? I mean, Director of National Intelligence acting, now departed, Richard Grenell, did a fantastic job from a transparency perspective. Are we going to get more transparency? Because the American people deserve to know what was done to you and what happened to your administration before we go in and look at the next possible election.
It should never be allowed to happen again, Buck. What happened to this administration? What happened to General Flynn? What happened to others that are going through it still? It should never. It was an attempted coup. It was an attempted takedown of a duly elected president. Happened to be me. Could have been anybody. But you would think we're not a third world country. This was a coup, and they got caught. And they've been caught. I think John Ratcliffe is going to do a fantastic job. Bill Barr is doing a terrific job. And I specifically, I as you know, I mean, you know it probably better than anybody, I would absolutely have the right to totally get involved. I've chosen not to because I think it's better that if I didn't, I could and I could have. But I've chosen not to. Bill Barr's handling it. Other people are handling it. John Ratcliffe now is fantastic. He'll be involved. But I will say this, I believe you're going to see things that will shock the minds, even of the people that were most skeptical. It is an incredible, I think it's the greatest scandal, and a political scandal certainly in the history of our country. This makes Watergate, what they did to us, many of us, but what they did to this country makes Watergate look like small potatoes.
We're speaking to President of the United States, Donald Trump. Mr. President, you signed an executive order today having to do with social media platforms and essentially declaring that they cannot have certain protection if they're going to be politically biased, as we saw with the Twitter notification on a recent tweet of yours. First off, I just want to know, what do you want to see from these platforms going forward?
Well, I signed, and this has to do with 230, but it's really more than that. It's really it's a level of power, whether you could almost say it's monopolistic power, but it's very dangerous for our country, where you have a few people, where you have an individual, where you have a company that literally is going to call the shot of our elections. And they treat us very, very unfairly. You know that from a conservative standpoint, from a Republican standpoint, they treat us so horribly. There are those that say it's an incredible miracle, the miracle of 2016, because they were very much against us. But now they're insane. They've gone insane. And you look at what's going on, along with some others, in all fairness, working with the Democrats, and they're very well aligned with the Democrats, as is the media aligned with the Democrats, with the exception of a small amount. one of the reasons I do calls like this is we have to get our word out. And if we didn't, we wouldn't have a chance. But the media, I call it the fake news media, as you very well know, the media is disgraceful. They're so dishonest. Not all of it. There are some great people, great journalists that I know and I respect, but tremendous amounts, a vast majority of the media, people have no idea how bad the New York Times is, how bad, how evil, how corrupt, in my opinion, the New York Times is. They'll take something that's good and make it sound horrible. The Washington Post, I call it the Amazon Washington Post, is just horrible. And, you know, the interesting thing, if you're a person, you're driving a cab, you're a bricklayer, a carpenter, an executive, you read a story, you don't know what's going on. I know what happened, and then I'll read a story, and it bears no relationship to the story, and they know it. They have phony sources, people that don't exist. I mean, usually it's people, they make them up. It's not like, oh, gee, the source wasn't quoted accurately. There was no source. It's phony sources. So I think you know this maybe better than most, Buck, but it is incredibly dishonest. So we need an honest media, and we have to call out these platforms, these horrible platforms that have been so biased. I mean, on the front page today of the New York Post, they have a man named Yoel Roth, and he's the king, I guess, of Twitter. He's the judge of what goes on Twitter, and he's a super lefty that would just, like to destroy.
Yes, hates your administration, and he's a site integrity chief, I believe, is his title over there. Whatever that means.
And you look at his past statements and tweets, and you take a look at what he said on social media, and it's terrible. And that goes for Facebook. They had the woman who was so atrocious at a hearing 6 months ago, if you remember her. I said, isn't that same woman? Called out my son, he's a very young guy. He's just turned 14 years old, and this was a year ago, right? And she is just horrendous. And the two other people that Facebook appointed, these are horrendous people, and there's no fairness with them. So we have to do it the hard way, and that's what I do. I mean, I fight, and I fight for what I know is best for the country.
And I wanted to get your thoughts, Mr. President, on what's going on right now in Minneapolis. I saw that there's at least reporting of, additional, not just protests, but additional looting and violence on the streets there. And the mayor is calling for calm. The National Guard has been called in. What are your thoughts on that situation, and how does the federal government play a role in calming things down and also achieving justice? It
is very, very sad, and we've notified everybody in our side, on the federal side. We're very much engaged and working with local law enforcement. That goes from Bill Barr, the Attorney General, to the FBI, and we're very much involved with it. We want to get to the bottom. It was a terrible scene. I watched it like everybody else did. That was a horrible thing that I watched. Horrible.
And I want to also ask, before we let you get back to running the country and leading the free world, sir, what you think your chances are right now going up against Joe Biden, who now wears a mask a lot of the time, all over the place in his Twitter avatar, and he's certainly making a thing of it. How do you think your competition is shaping up so far, and what are going to be some of the ways that you want to make sure the American people remember why a Trump presidency part 2 would be very different from a Biden presidency?
Well, I think we're going to do very well over the next number of months. You're starting to see the numbers really do well, and he's not for jobs. You look at what they've done over there. Look, I'm only here because of Joe Biden and his partner. I'm only here for that reason. Without them, I wouldn't be here. I became president because people were very unhappy. China walked away with us, and we're very strong on China. China's had the worst year before the epidemic, before the pandemic. China had the worst year that they've had in 67 years, approximately 67 years, because we were being strong for the people of this country with respect to China. But I think Biden is surrounded by smart people. I think Biden himself is not at all smart. I don't think he knows what's going on. I see tweets come out where they analyze this thing or that thing or 15 different events that took place, and they analyze them very brilliantly. But that's not put out by Joe Biden. It's put out by people that are surrounding him, wanting to get him into office. He's turned very left. But again, I don't even think he's turned left. I think it's just that he doesn't know where he is. He's lost. He's a lost sheep. And I see him, I hear him, and I don't know how this man can be president. He just couldn't do it. And then you look at the son walking away with $1.5 billion of money to invest. China doesn't do that. They don't do that for the top people. Or you look at what happened with Ukraine with the son, where he ends up making a fortune. This guy didn't have a job, got thrown out of the services and didn't have a job for a long time. And then he's making millions of dollars a year. You can't have that as your president. I mean, it's just a very sad situation, but you just can't. Now, whether or not it all goes, the Democrats are very powerful. We have some very bad rhinos in our party, and frankly, some of the rhinos, some of the never-Trumpers are worse than the Democrats. And, we've appointed, you know this very well, we've appointed close to 275 federal judges, including appellate judges, 2 great Supreme Court judges. We're shattering records on judges. You look at that, we've rebuilt the military, we've cut taxes, we've gotten more regulation cuts than any president in history, and that's done in 3.5 years. And some of them went 8 years, or in one case, more than 8 years. Nobody's come close to regulation cuts. I'm protecting the Second Amendment. Joe Biden, you're going to lose your Second Amendment, 100%. We got veterans' choice. We took care of our military. But when we rebuilt our military and we took care of veterans' choice and also veterans' accountability, we're able now to take care of, we can fire people in the VA who treat our veterans badly. We can fire them. You couldn't do that because of, frankly, the unions and civil service. You couldn't do it. I mean, we've done so much. I don't think, and a lot of people, nobody disputes me on this, probably more in 3 years than just about any other president in the first 3 years. So we've done a lot. Hopefully that's going to be good enough because we need the 4 more years to cede religious liberty, so many other things that we've done that nobody else would do. A thing called right to try, where somebody who's terminally ill wasn't able to get a drug that looked like it works, but it wasn't fully tested yet. But they're terminally ill. They're going to die. They've been trying to get it passed for 45 years. They couldn't do it. I got it passed. And by the way, and miracles are taking place. Incredible things are happening. So we've done a lot, Buck, and we have some great support, and we really appreciate your viewpoint is very important to me. Very, very important. That's how we got to know each other.
Mr. President, it's an honor, sir. Thank you so much for calling in. And just can I get you to give some words of support? You're a New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker. You're speaking to a lot of New Yorkers right now. We've gone through a tough one. Can you just give us your closing thoughts on that, and then we'll let you get back to running the government?
Absolutely, Buck. Look, I'm very sad with what I see in New York. I've known New York. That's where I grew up. That's a place I just love. And when I look at those streets, it looks like they're barren. And you got to open it up. You got to get going. You got to just move. You're going to break this city. People are leaving. They're leaving for Florida. They're leaving for other places. The city is going to be broken. It's got to start having signs of life. It's very, very sad what they're doing, and they've got to do it really, really quickly and safely. But they have to do something. They can't let this go on because you're going to break the city.
Mr. President, thank you so much, sir. Stay in the fight. We appreciate it.
I will. Thank you very much, Buck. Great honor. Thank you.
There you go, the President of the United States, everyone. I didn't want to promise and then not be able to deliver on that one, so we kept it quiet. But I had a feeling he was going to call in today, and had a great conversation with him last week. We covered a lot of what we talked about today, and then there was a lot of stuff that was off the record and just getting to know the president. He's doing I think he's doing an amazing job, and I know he's going through a very difficult period right here. The whole country is, but that was certainly, I hope, for all of you, illuminating. Trump issues threat after raging Minneapolis protests. That's the front page. That's the top of the New York Times right now. The issue, you see, according to the most prominent liberal paper in the country, the ultimate left-wing opinion maker, if you will, the problem isn't over 100 businesses ransacked, looted, many of them lit on fire, burned to the ground. The problem isn't the violence, the hatred against the police. It's not that there are people yelling, "Shoot white people" last night, as was played on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox. That's not the problem. The problem, according to the New York Times, the mainstream media, and all the rest, is Trump and racism, of course. But those things go hand in hand in their mind. Trump is the ultimate symbol of racism to the left. As insane as that is, that's how they view it. They refer to widening demonstrations. This is, I have to tell you, this is one of these moments where something happened in the news cycle that I will remember forever. This is going to be one that really sticks out. You had MSNBC's Ali Velshi. And it's better if you see the video, but I want to play the audio for you so you can understand how crazy this is. You have an MSNBC reporter who is standing in front of a blaze. I mean, standing in front of a building that is completely engulfed in flames. And what he decides to say about it is, well, the following. Play clip 4.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started.
It is mostly a protest. He is standing in front of a massive fire burning down a private business after it had been looted. Over 100 businesses destroyed, looted, ransacked, people smashing ATM machines and cash registers with hammers, running out of stores, arms full of PlayStations and whatever else. But it's a mostly peaceful protest. This is like saying the Lincoln assassination was mostly a theatrical production, or that the Chernobyl meltdown was mostly a peaceful collision with subatomic particles, or perhaps the Bay of Pigs invasion was a mostly sunny day on Cuba's lovely beaches. These people in the left-wing media are absurd. They're disgusting. And they are damaging. You know, they often say that Trump is a threat, that Trump is a risk. They are damaging the country with what they do and what they say. And there are few things more cynical and condescending, let me just say this right now, than millionaire CNN and MSNBC anchors who live in Kalorama mansions or Upper West Side duplexes, pretending that hundreds of businesses burned and looted in Minneapolis is in any way an understandable expression of political discontent. It's just grotesque. It really is. Oh, yes, this is an expression of outrage. No. Looting and rioting is not an expression of outrage. It's looting and rioting. They lit a police station, the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis. They lit on fire, and the mayor, who, I mean, this is another moment in time where you realize what bad leadership really means. You know what it means to have people in charge who are just moronic. The mayor abandoned the site. He spoke about it. We can hear him. Play clip 5, please.
After receiving real-time information from our chief Arredondo, and after having numerous phone calls with him regarding the evolving situation at the 3rd precinct, it became clear that there were imminent threats to both officers and public. And the danger became necessary, and I made the decision to evacuate the 3rd precinct. The symbolism of a building cannot outweigh the importance of life, of our officers, or the public. We could not risk serious injury to anyone, and We will continue to patrol the 3rd precinct entirely. We will continue to do our jobs in that area.
Burning a police precinct to the ground without a fight. That's what happened in Minneapolis. And I'm so sorry for our wonderful listeners up in Minneapolis. You know, KTLK has put us on in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I know a lot of you listening to this right now, you've got to be thinking, what comes next? What comes next? What's going to happen to this city? What's going to happen if the people who have a monopoly on violence in the state, are supposed to have a monopoly on violence, refuse to use it to protect law, order, property, and safety? They run away. They don't want to upset the looters too much. Minneapolis, unfortunately, KTLK, you're finding out right now during these riots what New York has also learned during the COVID lockdown, that when there's a crisis that requires leadership with resolve, courage, and good judgment, having a weak, utterly ineffectual, far left-wing mayor is a huge liability that gets people hurt and destroys things. Your mayor was not, the same way that Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York was not up for the onslaught of COVID-19 and the institution of these lockdowns and his tyrannical, stupid rules. Your mayor was not up for the task here at all. There's probably going to be more protests. There were other cities across the country that had violent protests. Here in New York, there were over 70 people arrested. Not too far from where I'm doing this show right now, there were protests over George Floyd's death. And I would wonder, at what point are we allowed to ask, even for those who are protesting and not looters who are rioting or rioters who are looting, what do they want? If it's just to express rage, okay, well, what are the outer limits of that? Do they just get to set the boundary as they see fit? Is there something that they want that's a change in the system? Are they really going to pretend that there's a tremendous risk of death from law enforcement in the United States for anyone, including African American males? Because the data shows, without any question, that's just not true. It's just not true. In any given year in the United States, you have under 100 local law enforcement involved shootings that are under any kind of a suspicious or questionable circumstance. And when you start to dig into the data, and in some years it's more like 40 or 50, we're a country of 320 million people. There are literally millions and millions of interactions between civilians and police every year. Now, when something bad happens, it should be punished. And this looks like an egregious abuse of police power. And that has been as close to the consensus opinion on this issue as you could find on anything. I have not heard a single person of reputation, a single person with any kind of voice in public affairs who has expressed anything other than horror at George Floyd's death. They've already fired these officers. They are going to be facing charges. We do have a system in place. What is really the expectation? That there will never be, with the 700,000 or 800,000 cops that are on the job across the country, that no one is going to exceed their lawful authority, that no one's going to engage in lethal force? Now, remember, there are more. Granted, when you add it up on a per capita basis, that changes the story a bit. But there are more people who are white who are killed by law enforcement every year than any other race. So you have more white people who are shot by cops every year than any other race in the aggregate. Now, of course, the African-American community is only about 13% overall of the population, but has a disproportionate share of lethal encounters with law enforcement. By FBI statistics, You also look at the percentage of serious felonies, homicides, for example, involving the African-American population of the United States. And you look at all these statistics and these numbers, and there's very complicated discussions. And look, the FBI statistics bring up a whole host of other issues about law enforcement and disproportionate contact between certain communities and cops. And what do we do about all of this? But let's just understand with complete clarity across all racial lines, law enforcement is not an imminent lethal threat to people in the United States. Not even close. Now, does that mean that bad things never happen and people never get killed? Of course not. I told you about the article that I wrote. Well, I got a lot of conservative criticism, although they were wrong. I was right, so I don't really care. But conservatives, some of them, the smart ones didn't, criticized me over the Officer Brailsford shooting in Arizona, which was just, to me, it was just a murder caught on camera. And that was some, terrified young white guy who just got blown away by two cops with AR-15s in a hallway because they were on a power trip, right? I mean, so bad things happen. We get that. But what is the point of pretending that what's going on in Minneapolis is anything other than a cynical excuse for rage from groups of people who are very, very angry and irresponsible and in many cases hateful? Right? Antifa is on the scene. And I'm sure they think this is somehow a Trump thing, right? But, Antifa, which is largely, white suburban liberals wearing, blackface bandanas and masks and things like this and running around causing mayhem. And there are locals, many of whom you can see from the videos that are circulating, who are African-American, who are destroying things and looting things. And, so there are a whole bunch of bad actors at work here. But we should all be united in just the condemnation of this. And yet Don Lemon, who is, a guy that really understands, the sense of things on the street anywhere, never mind the street in Minneapolis. Yeah, he's really in touch with what it's like for struggling folks out there. Lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion on the Upper West Side, has a mansion in Bridgehampton or Sag Harbor. Very, very fancy, in a multi-million-dollar home there. Really tough for him. He's really he's in the struggle. Don Lemon understands the economic and financial struggles of folks. And but he wants to tell you why people are rioting. Let's go to Don Lemon and CNN. CNN is such a trash heap. Play 16.
If you read some of what people are saying, and if you watch some of conservative media, you would think people are mourning a target when you look at the pictures and what they are focusing on. Okay, so people should not be rioting. But do you understand what is behind that rioting? People should not be looting. Do you understand what's behind that looting? Do you have as much outrage for that, or for a man on the ground with a police officer with his knee on his neck for 8-9 minutes? What are you more outraged by? What matters more? As you said, a highly insured store. No one wants to lose their business. Don't get me wrong, and don't twist what I'm saying. There's nuance, and I know people will say, "Oh, well, don't say that I'm encouraging rioting." I'm not encouraging rioting. I'm trying to explain to you what is going on there.
Well, he sounds like he's looking for some rationalization for it. Do I understand what? Maybe we could interview some of the rioters and the looters. Why are you doing this? Because we're upset. What about this store? What did this store do to you? What did the AutoZone do to you? What did the sporting goods store or the Target or whatever it is that you're looting? What did that place do to you? And why do you think breaking the windows, the doors, and stealing private property, why do you think that's in any way helpful or even symbolic in a way that is useful? Does anyone want to ask them that question? Does anyone want to try to come up with an answer to that? No, of course. What is the rage behind all this? Is Minneapolis such a horrible place? So oppressive? No one can go outside? we've been through real tyranny from law enforcement here for months. And there's been not really, all that much outrage about it. I mean, people telling you can't leave your home, that actually feels like tyranny. So those who suffer specifically from an incident like George Floyd, I can understand. Yeah, it's horrific. That cop, based on what we've seen, should go to prison for a very long time. And everyone's saying that. But other people just get to say, well, I'm angry too. I'm going to go break things. Nope. It's unacceptable.
Weakness is refusing to take responsibility for your own actions. Weakness is pointing your finger at somebody else during a time of crisis. Donald Trump knows nothing about the strength of Minneapolis. We are strong as hell. Is this a difficult time period? Yes, but you better be damn sure that we're going to get through this.
This guy's in no position to be pointing fingers at anybody about weakness or strength right now. He called off his law enforcement officers. He called off his cops from defending their precinct. I mean, how many of you, if people were running at your home with a Molotov cocktail, would you say, whoa, it's just a building. I'm going to let it go. No, I don't think so. Not this audience. The cops, all armed. They just let them burn their precinct, the 3rd precinct of Minneapolis, burned down to the ground. And the mayor thinks he's anything other than an appalling just joke. It's not funny, though, of course.